Donald was driving home after another successful day at 46, the headquarters of his business. Everything seemed to be falling into place, just as he had always dreamed. His company, which he had invested everything into, was thriving, and the profits had never been higher. At home, his wife, Melanie, was pregnant with their second child, a surprise that somehow made their life together feel even more fulfilling. Their daughter, Camille, was getting ready to leave for college, marking a new chapter for the entire family. As Donald drove, the smooth hum of the engine mixed with the peacefulness of his thoughts, a rare moment of quiet he hadn't had in years. For a brief instant, everything felt just right. He had worked hard for this life, securing a bright future for his family, and now, for the first time, he was truly able to enjoy the fruits of his labor. But, as always, life had a way of taking unexpected turns when least expected. As he approached a curve in the road, Donald lightly tapped the brake pedal, but the car didn't respond. Confused, he pressed harder, only to feel the pedal give way beneath his foot. Panic quickly set in as he realized the brakes had failed. The car, picking up speed as it descended a slight hill, made Donald grip the steering wheel tighter. Ahead, the road seemed clear, but a sharp turn was quickly approaching. His mind raced as he searched for a solution. Shifting the car into a lower gear, he tried to slow it down manually. It worked just a little, but not nearly enough. That's when he spotted the gravel shoulder on the side of the road. Swerving toward it, his hands trembling, he fought to keep control. The car collided with an iron fence, jerking violently before finally coming to a stop. Donald sat still, frozen, the pounding of his heart drowning out everything around him. The car was wrecked, but miraculously, he was unharmed. For what felt like ages, he clutched the steering wheel, thoughts of his family flooding his mind, Melanie, Camille, and the unborn child. The idea of losing any of them, or them losing him, sent a shiver down his spine. He shuddered, then forced himself to focus. The car had to be towed to a mechanic. At the mechanic's shop, a grizzled man with grease-stained hands took a look at the car while Donald paced nervously. After what felt like an eternity, the mechanic emerged, his expression serious. "Someone messed with your brake lines," he said bluntly. Donald froze, his stomach dropping. "What do you mean, messed with?" he asked, disbelief flooding his voice. "This isn't just wear and tear," the mechanic replied, wiping his hands on a rag. "Somebody deliberately sabotaged them." A wave of nausea washed over Donald as he tried to process what the mechanic had said. Who would do something like this? He tried to push the thought away, hoping the mechanic was mistaken or that there was an innocent explanation. But he couldn't shake the feeling that something was wrong. He left the shop and made his way home, his mind racing with unanswered questions. When he pulled into their large suburban driveway, Melanie greeted him at the door, her smile as bright as usual. But there was something subtly off about her tonight. She absent-mindedly brushed a strand of hair from her face and asked, "You're late. Everything okay?" "Car trouble," Donald replied casually, choosing not to go into detail. "It's in the shop now." Melanie nodded, but her smile faltered for a split second. In the living room, her sister Louise was lounging on the couch, engrossed in her phone. When Donald walked in, she briefly looked up, offering a thin, uninterested smile before going back to her screen. Donald couldn't shake the feeling that something was off about her, too. Her posture was stiff, almost too tense, and it made him uneasy. "Maybe you should just buy a new car," Louise piped up, her tone thick with sarcasm. "Or, take better care of the one you've got." Donald couldn't help but smirk, but he didn't rise to the bait. Louise's sharp tongue was something he was used to, and their strained relationship had only gotten worse after a big argument years ago. But still, her words lingered in his mind, gnawing at him more than he wanted to admit. Combined with Melanie's distracted behavior, Donald couldn't ignore the nagging feeling that something was amiss. That night, as he lay next to Melanie, the mechanic's chilling words kept echoing in his mind. Tampered with. Melanie's strange behavior and Louise's thinly veiled hostility only made his suspicions grow stronger. He tried to convince himself he was overthinking it, that maybe it was just the stress of everything happening at once, especially with Melanie being pregnant. But the feeling wouldn't go away. No matter how much he tried to dismiss it, something didn't sit right. Before dawn, unable to sleep, Donald quietly slipped out of bed, careful not to wake Melanie. He needed to figure out what was really going on. The garage was bathed in the pale light of early morning when he stood in front of Melanie's SUV, his heart racing. What if there was something wrong with her car too? His hands shook as he climbed into the driver's seat, gripping the steering wheel. He thought about starting the engine but stopped, the fear rising in his chest. Instead, he opened the glove compartment, hoping to find something that would either distract him or offer some reassurance. Among the usual mess of receipts and miscellaneous items, something caught his eye: a thick envelope. Donald carefully pulled the envelope from the glove compartment and opened it. Inside were the pristine documents of a family life insurance policy. His breath caught in his throat. The policy was recent, dated just 2 weeks ago, and specifically listed Donald as the insured in case of his death. His mind spun. Melanie had never mentioned anything about this. They had always shared financial decisions, so why would she hide something like this from him? His pulse raced as he snapped a photo of the documents and slid them back into the envelope, carefully putting it all back in place. Sitting in the eerie silence of the garage, Donald was overwhelmed by the weight of what he had just found. First, the car brakes. Now this. The life insurance policy felt far too coincidental to ignore. It was like a dark thread was slowly unspooling in his life, leading him toward a terrifying conclusion he wasn't ready to face. But before jumping to conclusions, Donald knew he had to steady himself. Just as he was about to get out of the car, the garage door creaked, freezing him in place. He turned quickly to see Melanie standing there in her robe, loosely tied at the waist, her hair a tangled mess from sleep. Her face held a mixture of drowsiness and quiet curiosity. "Donald," she said, her voice thick with sleep. "What are you doing out here?" Donald quickly forced a smile, trying to hide the tightness in his body. "I was thinking of using your car today," he said, trying to keep his voice casual. "But then I realized you might need it. I'll just take a taxi instead." Melanie's eyes narrowed just a bit, her gaze scanning him with a hint of suspicion. "Are you sure?" she asked, her tone holding a layer of something Donald couldn't quite place. "Of course," he answered, keeping his voice light. "You never know when you might need to run errands. Wouldn't want you stuck without a car." She paused, her eyes lingering on him a little longer than usual. Finally, she nodded. "Okay, let me know if you need anything." Donald walked past her, offering a warm smile that felt like a mask, his heart still pounding. But inside, Donald's mind was a whirlwind. Melanie's reaction, though subtle, had only intensified his unease. There was something off about her. She wasn't openly suspicious, but the way she looked at him, the way she moved, it didn't feel right. The taxi ride to his office was quiet, but the weight of his thoughts pressed down on him, making the air feel thick and suffocating. By the time he arrived at his private office, his hands were trembling. He locked the door behind him and slumped into his chair, burying his face in his hands. "Is this really happening?" he thought, pulling out his phone to stare at the picture of the insurance documents. The idea of going to the police crossed his mind briefly, but he quickly dismissed it. Without concrete proof, making any accusations could ruin everything. If he was wrong, if he had misunderstood, it could tear his family apart. Instead, he turned to the internet, searching for private investigators. He needed someone discreet, someone reliable, and someone who could dig deep. After scrolling through countless reviews for what felt like hours, he finally found Norman Dutton, a seasoned investigator known for solving even the toughest cases. 2 hours later, Donald sat across from Norman in a modest office on the outskirts of town. The man gave off an air of quiet competence, his sharp eyes taking in everything with practiced ease. "Mr. Barman," Norman said, leaning back in his chair. "What brings you in today?" Donald hesitated for a moment, his eyes scanning the room as though the walls might be listening. He took a deep breath, then began recounting everything. The brake failure, the suspicious insurance policy, Melanie's odd behavior. His voice faltered a little as he finished. "I don't want to jump to conclusions," he admitted, his hands clenched tightly. "But something just doesn't feel right. I need to know what's really going on." Norman rubbed his hands together thoughtfully, his gaze unblinking. "Well, Donald, sounds like you've found yourself in quite the situation." He paused, studying Donald with a calm intensity. "Tell me more about your family." Donald paused for a moment, then began speaking again. He described Melanie, how they'd been married for over 15 years, how they had carefully built a life together, and how much he still loved her. He spoke with pride about Camille, their brilliant daughter about to go off to college, and the surprise of their second child on the way. He even mentioned his success in business, how he had worked tirelessly to provide for them all. Finally, he spoke of Melanie's sister, Louise. When he finished, Norman leaned back, taking in the information quietly. Then, his expression turned serious, and he leaned forward. "On the surface, it all sounds perfect," Donald, he said slowly, his lips tight. But setups like these, they often point to something darker. The words hit Donald like a cold slap to the face. Norman raised a calming hand. It's too early to say for sure, but we have to consider all possibilities. So, I need to ask, are there any hidden conflicts, secrets, or past issues you might have overlooked? Donald shifted in his chair, his mind racing. Then, suddenly, a memory surfaced, one he hadn't thought about in years. Louise, he murmured, almost to himself. Maybe. Go on, Norman urged, his gaze intent. 15 years ago, I started my business with Louise's husband, Albert. Donald began, his voice quiet. At first, everything went smoothly. We worked well together. But about a year in, I discovered he was embezzling money, committing fraud. If I hadn't caught him, it would have destroyed everything. I reported him, and he ended up in prison. 6 months later, he died there a heart attack. Norman's expression grew dark, but he didn't interrupt, allowing Donald to continue. After that, things with Louise got complicated, Donald continued. I felt guilty, so I helped her financially. Made sure she was all right. But she always blamed me for Albert's death, said the stress from prison killed him. Over time, though, it seemed like she forgave me. She even stayed with us from time to help Melanie when I was tied up with work. Donald's voice trailed off as he shook his head. But maybe she never really forgave me. Norman steepled his fingers, his gaze turning hard. Now that's an angle we can't ignore, he said grimly. If we're looking for motives, Louise has a pretty big one. But here's the unsettling part. What if your wife is involved? Donald's stomach turned. Melanie? No, she wouldn't. His voice wavered, a sense of uncertainty creeping in. Norman tapped his pen thoughtfully on the desk. It's a possibility we can't dismiss. But if your marriage is as solid as you say, what reason would she have? I don't know, Donald admitted, his voice barely audible. Norman studied him closely before asking, is it possible Melanie has a lover? The words hit Donald like a slap. He recoiled, his face flushing with disbelief. No. She's kind. Honest. She would never. But even as he spoke, a sliver of doubt began to worm its way into his mind. Could he really be so sure anymore? I don't think so, he added weakly, his words trailing off. But I don't know. Norman leaned back, his eyes sharp. Then we need to rule it out or confirm it. Here's my plan. First, I recommend a DNA test with Camille. Just to be certain. Donald's heart sank. What? Camille is my daughter. I know she is. Maybe she is, Norman said, his voice level. But maybe she isn't. We need to eliminate every possibility. Donald clenched his fists but said nothing. Second, Norman continued, I suggest we wiretap your house. Discreetly. No one will know. After a long pause, Donald nodded reluctantly. Okay. The weight of the situation was suffocating. Every new discovery seemed to pull him deeper into a nightmare he couldn't escape. Norman's voice dropped, taking on a grim tone. And one more thing, Donald, he said. For now, it might be wise for you to leave town. Take a business trip, or just come up with some excuse to be away for a while. Cases like this can escalate fast. I once worked with a man whose wife had been poisoning him for months, nearly killing him. By the time we uncovered the truth, he was blind and barely alive. The room felt colder with each word. Donald shifted uncomfortably, his pulse quickening as cold sweat began to form on his brow. Norman's gaze locked onto his, intense and unwavering. This is just the beginning, Donald. Stay alert. Be ready for anything. The following morning, Donald woke with a sense of determination that cut through the fog of uncertainty clouding his mind. The conversation with Norman still lingered, unsettling him, but he knew he couldn't let fear take over. Every move mattered now. He had to maintain the appearance of normalcy while quietly gathering information and staying off the radar. Over breakfast, Donald decided to test the waters. How about a family outing today? He suggested casually, spreading jam on his toast. Maybe we could hit a water park and then grab dinner at a nice place afterward. Melanie looked up, raising an eyebrow. A water park? That's not really like you. Exactly, Donald replied with a playful grin. It's been way too long since we did something fun together. We've all been so caught up in our routines, and this could be a nice change. Camille, distracted by her phone, perked up. A water park sounds awesome. Louise, sitting quietly at the table, glanced up but didn't say anything. Her skeptical look didn't escape Donald's notice, but she remained silent. As the family headed out for their outing, the house was left quiet and empty, a perfect opportunity. Shortly after they left, Norman and his team arrived in an unmarked van. They worked swiftly and silently, installing wiretaps and hidden cameras in all the key spots: the kitchen, the living room, and even the master bedroom. Their efficiency was almost chilling, leaving no evidence of their presence behind. Meanwhile, Donald did his best to keep up appearances at the water park. He laughed, joked, and even joined Camille on a few of the slides. Melanie seemed to relax as the day went on, her earlier tension slowly fading. Louise, however, remained distant, her sharp eyes always watching Donald, never fully letting go of her scrutiny. At dinner, in a cozy Italian restaurant, Donald casually mentioned his business trip. Cutting into his steak, he said, "I wanted to let you know, I've got a major project coming up at work. It's critical, and I'll have to be out of town for a couple of weeks." Melanie's reaction was immediate. Her smile faltered, and her voice grew cold. "You're leaving again?" she asked, frustration creeping into her tone. "Donald, you're always so busy with work. I'm pregnant, and Camille's getting ready to leave for college. Don't you think we need you here?" Before Donald could respond, Louise's calm voice interrupted. "Melanie, sometimes work has to come first. Donald is the one supporting us all. If this project is that important, we should support him." Melanie shot Louise a sharp look, her jaw tightening, but she quickly forced a smile. "You're right," she said, her words strained. "I overreacted." Donald noticed the tension between them. Melanie's reaction had been controlled, but Louise's intervention seemed to shut her down, like a silent warning. It felt off to him, but he said nothing. Back home that evening, Donald's nerves were frayed. The anxiety gnawed at him, refusing to let go. When Melanie offered him tea, he politely declined, choosing instead to make his own chamomile tea. "Are you okay?" Melanie asked, watching him closely as he stirred his tea, her eyes sharp with suspicion. Donald forced a smile, trying to cover up the unease that was choking him. "I'm fine," he reassured her, attempting to sound casual. "Just trying to take some of the burden off you. You've got enough on your plate." Melanie studied him for a long moment, her gaze lingering, filled with something he couldn't quite read. Then, without saying a word, she turned and left the room. A few days later, Donald packed a small suitcase, said his goodbyes, and gave Camille an unusually long hug. His heart clenched as he thought about the DNA test, the truth hanging over him like a dark storm cloud. With a brief kiss on Melanie's cheek, he walked out the door without a second glance. His hotel room, several towns away, was basic and unremarkable, a place to wait for updates from Norman in the DNA lab. But Donald couldn't just sit idly. Taking Norman's advice, he decided to dive into their finances, searching for any signs of discrepancies or trouble. At first, everything appeared normal. But then, he found something large, unexplained withdrawals from Melanie's account, all made around the same time the life insurance policy was issued. "Maybe it's for the policy," Donald muttered to himself, trying to justify it. But the numbers didn't add up. The total amount Melanie had withdrawn was far greater than what the policy could have cost. His stomach knotted. Where's the rest of the money going? Frustrated, Donald leaned back in the worn chair, staring up at the cracked ceiling of the hotel room. "Forget it," he muttered under his breath. "I'll wait for Norman's report and the DNA results. One thing at a time." The call came that afternoon. Donald sat on the edge of the bed, his phone clenched tightly in his hand. The DNA lab's number appeared on the screen, and for a brief moment, he hesitated before answering. "Mr. Barman," the voice on the other end said, its tone flat and clinical. "We've completed the testing. The results are conclusive. The DNA samples you provided do not match. Camille is not your biological daughter." The words hit Donald like a sledgehammer. His chest tightened, and the walls of the room seemed to close in around him. The life he had worked so hard to build, the family he had fought for, began to unravel in an instant. Hands trembling, Donald dialed Norman's number. The phone rang once before the detective picked up. "Donald." Norman's voice was sharp, instantly sensing something was wrong. "What happened?" "She's not mine," Donald choked out, his voice cracking. "Camille, she's not my daughter." Norman exhaled sharply, a sound that combined sympathy with grim understanding. "I feared that might be the case," he said softly. "Listen, Donald, I know this is hard, but you need to stay focused. This is the moment when people start to crack, and that's when they make mistakes." Donald barely heard Norman's words. The storm in his head was deafening. His entire life, his marriage, his family, was disintegrating, piece by horrifying piece. "Do you have anything concrete yet?" Donald asked, his voice hoarse with desperation. "I do," Norman replied, his tone calm and steady. "But I need more time to connect the dots." There's a bigger picture unfolding, but it's not all clear yet. In the meantime, you need to act, and act fast. Act? What do you mean? Donald's voice trembled under the weight of everything he had just uncovered and everything he still didn't know. First, you need a lawyer, Norman said firmly. A good one. And financial consultants to protect your assets. File for divorce before Melanie does. If you don't, they might make the first move and take everything. Why the rush? Donald asked, still reeling from the avalanche of information Norman had just thrown at him. Norman paused, his voice lowering to a more serious tone. 2 reasons. 1. Filing first puts them on the defensive. When people panic, they make mistakes, and that's when I can gather the evidence I need. 2. If Melanie files first, she could freeze your accounts or lay claim to your assets. Don't give her that opportunity. Though overwhelmed, Donald couldn't ignore the cold logic of Norman's words. All right, he said finally, his voice thick with a reluctant sense of duty. I'll handle it in the next 10 days. For the next several days, Donald worked tirelessly, channeling every ounce of energy he had into securing his position. He hired one of the city's top divorce lawyers and brought in a team of financial consultants specializing in protecting assets during contentious divorces. Together, they devised a strategy to safeguard his wealth and prepare him for the inevitable fallout. The first step was selling his stake in the business. He approached his most trusted partners, people who had been by his side for years, and quietly sold them his shares. The funds were transferred into accounts that neither Melanie nor Louise could access. Next, under the guidance of his consultants, Donald moved the money into a series of intricate trusts and offshore accounts. The system was like a maze, complicated and secure, designed to keep his assets well out of their reach. The final step was the hardest, cutting Melanie off financially. He froze all their joint accounts, severing the last thread of control she had over his money. It felt cold, calculating, almost like betrayal. But it was necessary. When the last of the safeguards was in place, Donald sat back in his chair, mentally and physically exhausted. He had done everything he could to protect himself. The next morning, Donald found himself holding his phone, uncertain whether he should call Melanie. He hadn't spoken to her directly since leaving for his business trip, and he knew the frozen accounts would soon raise questions. The confrontation was inevitable. He steeled himself for it. The phone buzzed in his hand, snapping him out of his thoughts. It was Melanie. Donald hesitated for a long moment before answering. Hello. Donald. Melanie's voice was carefully neutral. How are you? Is everything going well with work? It's fine, Donald said, keeping his voice steady despite the knot in his stomach. Everything's fine. That's good. Melanie replied quickly, but there was tension beneath her words. Listen, I noticed the bank account is frozen. Did you block it? Or is there some sort of issue? We have Camille's college deposit due soon. Donald's chest tightened, but he didn't falter. He took a slow breath, steadying himself. Melanie, Camille's not my daughter, he said, the words colder than he had meant them to be. So pay for it yourself. And by the way, a courier will be delivering the divorce papers today. There was a sharp intake of breath on the other end of the line. What? Donald, what are you talking about? This doesn't make sense. Are you okay? Donald's grip on the phone tightened, feeling both like a lifeline and a wall between him and the woman he thought he knew. I'm fine, he said flatly. And I'm sorry, but we'll talk in court. There'll be plenty to discuss then. Before Melanie could respond, Donald ended the call abruptly. The silence that followed felt deafening, as if everything in his life had just collapsed. For a moment, he let himself sink into that quiet void. Then, without warning, his composure cracked. He buried his face in his hands and wept. 15 years of marriage, a daughter he had raised as his own, everything was slipping away. Worse, he still didn't know the full truth. What other secrets were Melanie and Louise hiding? What had he missed all these years? The phone buzzed again. And again. Donald couldn't bring himself to answer. He couldn't face hearing Melanie's anger or her desperate pleas. But when the third call came, he glanced at the screen, seeing Camille's name. Wiping his eyes, Donald answered the phone. Hello, Dad? Camille's voice came through frantic. What's going on? Mom's freaking out, and I don't understand anything. She says the accounts are blocked. I need money for my deposit. What's happening? Donald's throat tightened, guilt sweeping over him. He fought to keep his voice steady. Camille, something has come up. Your college plans might have to wait a little while. What? Camille's voice cracked, panic rising. Dad, I can't wait. This is my future. Please, just tell me what's going on. Donald pinched the bridge of his nose, summoning what little strength he had left. Camille, calm down. Your mother and I need to work through some things. I promise, if you stay patient, everything will be okay. We'll talk soon. All right? But Camille's voice faltered, uncertain. Please, Camille, Donald interrupted gently but firmly. Trust me. There was a long pause. Finally, in a small, broken voice, Camille replied, Okay, Dad. When the call ended, Donald set the phone down with a heavy sigh and stared at the ceiling. Guilt and sorrow churned inside him, twisting his insides. No matter what happened with Melanie and Louise, Camille would always be his daughter in his heart. He had raised her, loved her, she was his in every way that mattered. But how much more could he endure before this nightmare reached its end? That night, Donald barely slept. The whiskey burned his throat as he poured glass after glass, hoping to drown the relentless ache in his chest. His sobs were raw and guttural, a pain he hadn't allowed himself to feel since childhood. By dawn, the bottle was empty, and Donald lay hollow and exhausted, staring blankly at the ceiling. His phone buzzed, pulling him from his stupor. It was Norman. Donald, Norman said briskly, we've hit a turning point. The divorce news shook them. It's working. We need to meet today, and bring your lawyer. Though his head pounded and his body felt drained, Donald knew he couldn't stop now. He agreed, his voice hoarse but resolute. When Donald arrived at the office for their meeting, his lawyer was already seated, sifting through a stack of documents with a grim expression. Moments later, Norman entered, carrying a large briefcase. His face was set with the weight of someone about to reveal something explosive. All right, Norman began, placing the briefcase on the table. Here's what I've uncovered. He opened the case and began laying out the evidence, photographs, video recordings, and transcripts of intercepted conversations. The sheer volume of material was overwhelming, and Donald leaned forward, his breath catching as he processed the horrifying story they painted. Melanie and Louise appeared in numerous photos and videos, speaking in hushed tones, making phone calls, and meeting secretly. Then came the images of Melanie with another man, Ben. Their interactions were unmistakably private. Donald's chest tightened as he stared at one photo of Ben stroking Melanie's hair, their faces close. It was undeniable. This is Ben, Norman said, his voice calm. Melanie's lover. Donald barely heard the words, his heartbeat roaring in his ears. His lawyer muttered a curse under his breath, shaking his head at the damning evidence. And this, Norman said, pulling out an audio file, is the most incriminating piece. He pressed play. The voices of Melanie and Louise filled the room, cold and calculating. Their words confirmed everything Donald had feared and more. Donald's vision blurred as his chest constricted painfully. His lawyer reached out, gripping his shoulder. Donald, Norman said urgently, leaning closer. Are you okay? Donald tried to speak, but his voice failed him. The room spun, and his breathing became ragged. A crushing pain gripped his chest as he slumped forward. Call a doctor, his lawyer shouted. A doctor arrived quickly, administering an injection to stabilize Donald. Your heart's under too much strain, the doctor warned. Stress like this can be dangerous. You need a full cardiac evaluation immediately. Donald nodded weakly, trembling as he leaned back in his chair. His face was pale, and his breaths came in shallow, labored gasps. Donald, Norman said softly after a moment, his tone more measured. I know this is a lot to process, but the evidence is overwhelming. We can take this to court, not just for the divorce, but for a criminal case. Are you ready? Donald didn't trust himself to speak. He simply nodded, his eyes filled with a quiet, determined fury. 5 days later, the courtroom was packed. Donald sat beside his lawyer, his face calm but hollow. Across the room, Melanie sat flanked by Louise and her legal team. She looked confident, her hand resting on her pregnant belly, a subtle, calculated gesture. Melanie's lawyers began their arguments, portraying Donald as a vindictive man who had plotted the divorce to freeze her out of their shared assets. They accused him of being manipulative, even unfaithful. They dismissed the DNA test as inconclusive and demanded an independent study. Their strategy was clear: prolong the proceedings, muddy the waters, and buy time. Donald's lawyer fought back, dismantling their claims piece by piece. The courtroom became a battleground, each side relentlessly pushing their narrative. Melanie's pregnancy, however, proved to be a potent weapon, and her lawyers wielded it expertly to garner sympathy. At a critical moment, Donald exchanged a glance with his lawyer and gave a subtle nod. It was time. Donald's lawyer stood, his voice calm but commanding. Your Honor, we have new evidence to present. This material is not only relevant to this case, but it also suggests grounds for a criminal investigation. He handed a thick folder to the judge. I must warn you, he added gravely, this evidence may change the scope of these proceedings. The courtroom fell silent as the judge accepted the folder, his brow furrowing as he scanned the contents. His expression darkened as he read. We'll take a 30-minute recess, the judge announced, his voice heavy with authority. I need time to review this material. In his chambers, the judge and two legal advisors pored over the folder. Each page painted a darker picture than the last. The first section contained photographic evidence. Ben, caught on a street surveillance camera late at night, crouching near Donald's car. The images showed him tampering with the brake system, a wrench in one hand and another unidentifiable tool in the other. His actions were deliberate, methodical, and left no doubt that this was a premeditated act. Next came transcripts of recorded conversations between Melanie and Louise, captured after the brake tampering attempt failed. The words revealed cracks in their conspiracy, Melanie's mounting anxiety clashing with Louise's cold determination. This should have worked, Melanie's voice quavered. Maybe we shouldn't have done this. Maybe we should have just gone for a divorce. Are you serious right now? Louise snapped. If you just divorce him, Donald will dig into everything. He'll find out about Ben. Then where will you be? No alimony. No assets. He'll bury you in court, Melanie. You'll have nothing. But what about Ben? Melanie asked, fear lacing her words. If he gets caught, this could ruin everything. Ben's careful, Louise replied coldly. He knows the stakes. And don't forget, if Donald dies, we get the insurance payout. His inheritance, his assets, everything. You, me, and Ben will be set for life. A long pause followed, broken only by Melanie's shallow breathing. Fine, she finally said, her voice trembling. But I'm scared, Louise. This is dangerous. Dangerous? Louise laughed humorlessly. You'll be thanking me when it's over. The judge set down the file. He looked up, his face pale, clearly shaken by the contents. Donald sat still, his body numb. He had feared this day, but now that the truth was out in the open, the weight of it all pressed down on him harder than ever. What would Melanie say now? Would she deny it all, try to manipulate her way out? And what about Louise? How far had their plan gone? The clock on the wall ticked slowly, but each passing second felt like an eternity. The folder also contained videos of Melanie and Ben. One particularly damning clip showed Ben tenderly stroking Melanie's pregnant belly, whispering to her. Other documents revealed that Ben was financially unstable, providing him with a clear motive to conspire with Melanie against Donald. The courtroom fell into an uneasy silence as the judge returned from recess, his expression grim. He looked directly at Melanie's legal team, his voice steady but filled with authority. This court has reviewed the new evidence, he said. It is sufficient to warrant a criminal investigation. These proceedings will not only address the divorce but also explore potential charges of conspiracy. A collective gasp rippled through the courtroom. Melanie's confident demeanor faltered, her hand dropping from her belly. Louise's icy composure cracked as she shifted uncomfortably in her seat. Donald sat motionless, his face unreadable. But inside, a flicker of vindication burned. The truth was finally beginning to surface. The judge's expression was severe, his lips pressed into a thin line as he shuffled the documents before him. Finally, he looked up, his voice resonating through the silent courtroom. I have reviewed the materials submitted by the petitioner's counsel, he began, his tone grave. This evidence is deeply troubling. It appears that we are dealing with not only a contentious divorce but also allegations of premeditated criminal activity, including conspiracy to commit murder. A wave of gasps rippled through the courtroom. Melanie's face drained of color, her hands trembling. Beside her, Louise's eyes narrowed, but she kept her composure, her jaw set like stone. The judge continued, given the severity of these allegations and the compelling nature of the evidence, I am compelled to take immediate action. This court will notify law enforcement to conduct a full investigation. Until that investigation is complete, all discussions regarding asset division and custody arrangements are suspended. The weight of the judge's words settled over the room like a suffocating cloud. The gavel came down with a sharp, decisive thud. This hearing is adjourned until further notice. Court officers remain in the building to assist the police. The courtroom erupted in murmurs as the gravity of the revelation sank in. For Melanie, Louise, and Ben, the walls were closing in fast. Within days, the police launched a formal investigation, and the fallout was swift and unforgiving. Melanie, Louise, and Ben were taken into custody. Norman's meticulous work had left no doubt. The brake tampering, the secret insurance policy, the recorded conversations, it all painted a damning picture. For the conspirators, this was the end. They were charged with conspiracy. The carefully curated lives they had built crumbled under the weight of their own actions. Donald, though vindicated, felt no joy, only the bitter taste of loss. The nightmare had exposed truths he had never imagined and destroyed relationships he had thought were unshakable. One afternoon, Donald sat across from Melanie in the sterile visiting room of the county jail. She looked worn and fragile, her once vibrant energy replaced by exhaustion and regret. "Donald," she began, her voice trembling. I don't even know where to start." Donald's expression was cold, his arms crossed. "Then don't," he said flatly. "Just say what you need to say." Tears welled in Melanie's eyes as she wiped her face, her voice breaking. "I'm sorry. I never wanted it to come to this. I loved Ben. He was my first love, my everything. But life, it separated us. Then you came along. You were a good man, Donald. A great provider. You were kind, stable. But you were never him. Ben was my hero." Donald clenched his jaw, his eyes unflinching. "So I was a placeholder? A paycheck? The man you could tolerate while plotting to kill me?" Melanie shook her head, breaking into sobs. "No, it wasn't supposed to go that far. I made mistakes, terrible mistakes. I let Louise convince me. I was scared, Donald. I thought you'd leave me with nothing." Donald's gaze remained fixed on her, his silence cutting deeper than words. Melanie sniffled, trying to compose herself. "Please, Donald," she whispered. "Promise me you'll take care of Camille. She's innocent in all this." Donald's voice was distant, devoid of warmth. "I'll take care of Camille because she's my daughter in every way that matters. But you, Melanie? You're nothing to me now. You destroyed everything." Melanie lowered her head, defeated. "I understand," she murmured. "And I'm sorry." Donald's next visit was with Louise. Unlike Melanie, she showed no sign of remorse. Sitting in her cell, her chin held high, she met Donald's gaze with unfiltered hatred. "I suppose you're here to gloat," she sneered. "No," Donald replied evenly. "I'm here to understand. Why, Louise? Why do this?" Louise laughed bitterly. "Understand? You think you're the victim here? You ruined my life, Donald. You sent Albert to prison, and he died because of you. He was a good man until you destroyed him." Donald shook his head slowly. "Albert was a fraud, Louise. He embezzled from the business and betrayed everyone. He ruined himself. Lies." Louise spat. "You could have saved him, but you didn't. You cared more about your precious company than about people." Donald sighed, his exhaustion evident. "I understand your anger, but you've twisted the truth to suit your hatred. Albert made his choices. He betrayed me, and he betrayed you. You're a monster, Donald," Louise said venomously. "I wanted to make you pay. But now you're walking free while we rot in here." Donald rose to leave, his face devoid of emotion. "I won't pity you. You made your choices, just like Albert." Sitting down with Camille was the hardest. Her red, swollen eyes were filled with confusion and anger. "How could you, Dad?" she demanded, her voice trembling. "Mom's in prison. Louise is in prison. Everything's ruined." "Camille," Donald said softly, "you know why they tried to harm me. I didn't want this, but I couldn't ignore the truth. They're my family," she screamed. "And you destroyed us." Donald's heart broke at her words. "Camille, I know this is painful, but they made their own decisions. I had to protect myself." "You're lying," Camille cried, tears streaming down her face. "You could have fixed this. You could have done something. I hate you." Her words pierced Donald like a dagger. He sat quietly, letting her vent her pain. When her sobs subsided, he spoke gently. "I'm sorry you feel that way, but I won't let you suffer because of this. I've set up an account for you, enough to cover college and your living expenses. You'll be okay, Camille. No matter what, I want the best for you." Camille didn't respond, her sobs filling the room. Donald left quietly, his heart heavy. He knew she was hurting, and though her anger stung, he couldn't blame her. In court, the evidence was overwhelming. Melanie, Louise, and Ben were convicted of conspiracy and attempted murder. Melanie wept openly as the verdict was read, while Louise remained cold and unrepentant. Ben sat silently, his head bowed in defeat. Donald had won, but it felt hollow. The life he had fought so hard to protect was gone, replaced by shattered memories and fractured relationships. Camille, consumed by anger and pain, cut all contact, even refusing the money Donald had set aside for her. Still, Donald left the account untouched, hoping that one day she might forgive him. For now, he resolved to rebuild his life quietly, stepping away from Camille's world but leaving the door open should she ever choose to return.